episode 251 of the CRICKETher Weekly, and it's a very special episode of the CRICKETher Weekly because we've landed, we're in Australia, the sun's shining. That's quite important because it hasn't been shining for approximately the last 36 hours in Sydney, but it's shining at the moment. Both teams have managed to get an outdoor practice session in today at North Sydney Oval where we are. We've got the nets behind us. The forecast for tomorrow is reasonable, so that's very exciting. I don't know if you can see there, but John Lewis and Heather Knight having a good old chin wag over there. They've got some decisions to make ahead of tomorrow, some things to think about. We'll talk about that in a minute. Sid, how nice is it to be here in Australia?
Yeah, it's lovely. Ahead of us are the tower blocks of Sydney, which stretch all behind us there. And North Sydney Oval is looking great. They're just preparing the ground now. They've been putting in all of the Hawkeye stuff and all of the zing bales and all stuff like that. So it's all very exciting.
Absolutely. Now, we have just been in the captain's pressers. So we had Heather Knight followed by Alyssa Healy. So let's talk about kind of what was said. It's a little bit odd because we're recording this on Saturday with the first match going to be due to start tomorrow. You may well be, if you're in England, be watching this on Saturday with when you wake up with the first match due to be starting very late tonight. So just going to have to bear with us with the time difference. So we're going to be releasing this video on Saturday, which is kind of a little bit earlier than usual. But anyhow, we've just had those captains' press conferences, Sid. Let's start with Heather Knight, because there was one big thing in particular that she talked about that's kind of only tangentially related to the Ashes, and that was Afghanistan. Sid, what did she have to say?
Well, she was asked directly about Afghanistan and whether she sympathised with the plight of the players and what her opinion was. And she gave a reasonably decent Heather Knight political answer. We know that Heather Knight is quite an activist person, so she's someone that will actually care about this situation. She said quite explicitly the situation in Afghanistan is terrible, and that it's important to kind of take steps to show our support. She said that England players are hoping to meet some of the Afghan players in exile when they are in Melbourne next week. So she's had a little bit of her say today, but she wasn't the only person who had a say today, because Richard Gould also had a say today, didn't he, Raf?
Yes, he did, absolutely. So Richard Gould has actually been almost, I think pressurised is probably the right word, into giving a statement, because previously the ECB had been very much, well, we aren't going to play bilateral cricket, but we are going to play them in the Champions Trophy, the Afghanistan men's team, and lump it basically. But there has been enough political pressure now that he's felt that he needed to do a bit more. So he's actually issued a public statement, or it's a letter to the ICC, I think, but he's released it publicly, so it's one of those kind of political letters. He says what's taking place in Afghanistan is the worst violation of women's rights anywhere on earth. If we do not take the actions that are within our power to take, we are all complicit and have failed the privilege that comes with holding a global leadership position in our sport. Very strong words there, actually, and definitely the strongest statement that we've seen so far from anyone in a senior leadership position within cricket, in terms of basically saying that this is a moral issue and we must act. And he's called directly on the ICC to do two things that many of us have been calling for a while. Number one is to cut some of the funding that goes to the Afghanistan Cricket Board, because obviously some of that funding is meant to be channelled into women's cricket. And he's also arguing that the ICC should fund directly the the Afghanistan women's team in exile. So that was quite striking in terms of actually being somebody senior within cricket, calling for the ICC to take action and doing so publicly. Our sense is that the ECB and Cricket Australia have presumably been calling for this behind closed doors, but this is now ramping it up slightly. And I think that Heather Knight speaking out today in the press conference was important, not necessarily because she expressed any particular view on the boycott, because she didn't say anything directly about the boycott, but it's actually a cricketer in a senior position, currently playing, because we've had some former cricketers speak out, saying basically that we need to be doing more to help the Afghanistan women's team. And actually, we need to be giving those players a voice. and she specifically referred to the match that an Afghanistan women's 11 is playing in Melbourne on the first day of the day-night test. It's going to be in the morning, a T20 game, and she said, you know, I'd love to see that broadcast far and wide, and people to actually be talking about that and giving the focus to those women rather than all of the attention being on, I guess, men, essentially. So it was quite powerful from Heather there.
Yeah, definitely is. I think all these things are positive. You know, it feels like we're starting to move in the direction we want, which is starting to put pressure on the ICC to take the action that they need to take.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have to just monitor that and see what happens. But I think that this Women's Ashes series, there's going to be a lot of focus on that, and then potentially on the Afghanistan issue because of the fact that an Afghanistan women's 11 is playing in that on that day of the first day of the test, and presumably actually that's how Cricket Australia planned it. So good for Cricket Australia for recognising that opportunity, I suppose. So shall we talk about the actual Ashes series, Sid, because a lot was said about that in both captains' press conferences. From an England perspective, there's still a question mark at the time of recording over Kate Cross, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, how much of a question mark there really is. We were able to watch England's training session. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But it's important to note that Kate Cross played very little part in the training session in terms of actually the sort of serious end of it. So she was a part of it the whole time. She wasn't apart from it. Mahika Gould was also here, for example, and she was apart from the main training session. She didn't take part in the big huddle and things like that. Kate Cross did take part in the big huddle. She did kind of join in, but when it got serious or when anything that might have presented a risk, like she didn't take part in the game of football that they were having, she just stood on the sidelines then. So my guess is that she's probably not going to play tomorrow. Heather Knight was still, though, remaining quite tight-lipped. She still wants the Australians to think that maybe she will.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? There was a lot of psychology going into both presses. It definitely felt like they were partly speaking to their opposite number, as well as to the media. My feeling about Kate Cross is that they'll really be aiming for her to be fit to play in the Test match at the MCG, and therefore they might well be being quite reserved about her playing in these opening ODIs. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see. From a kind of psychology perspective, Alyssa Healy was quite interesting, I thought, because she actually talked about kind of managing emotions being the most important thing for Australia to do. She said if we can manage our emotions, we'll go a long way to winning this. So interesting kind of slight switch in focus, because previously there's kind of, it's very much been about the skills of both sides and everything like that, but her kind of what Alyssa Healy focused on today very much seemed to be about kind of the slightly more the psychological side, I suppose.
Yeah, and it was quite a different Alyssa Healy that we saw today to the one we've seen in previous years. She was famously said before a previous Ashes series, we're going to bring the bitch back. There was none of that today. It was all, very much, England are a really good side and we're going to have to play really well to beat them. Heather Knight was very, very much talking about them being the underdogs. Heather Knight's like, we're the underdogs. Everyone expects Australia to win, but we can come through. We can still do this. Alyssa Healy, was a little bit like, she didn't say, we're absolutely didn't say they're guaranteed to win, but she was like, we're quietly confident, and it was less aggressive. It was less Alyssa Healy in a funny kind of way.
I think that's what the captaincy has done to her, actually, and actually having that leadership role for the last couple of years, since the last Women's Ashes, essentially, has kind of made her like a little bit more restrained. You could maybe argue that not having won that recent T20 World Cup has kind of, meant that she needed to be a bit more restrained, and that it's not in Australia's gift just to go, yeah, we're the best team in the world quite anymore. So perhaps that's kind of what's going on there. There was a little bit of more Alyssa Healy when she talked about the crowds, because there's been this big kind of focus on Cricket Australia getting people to actually come to the ground, and we're hearing, now that we're here, that potentially North Sydney Oval for the first match, this first ODI, is going to be at a near capacity crowd, which would be very exciting and a big statement to start the series. Alyssa Healy's take on it was, let's make the English feel uncomfortable. and let's really make them aware that they're in Australia. And that was a little bit more of the Alyssa Healy that we've come to know and love. The other obviously important thing that she said was that she confirmed that she will be taking the gloves. I don't think there was any question mark about whether she was going to play. I think it was more about whether she was going to play as a pure batter.
Yeah, she did a fitness test today. We were able to sort of watch that from a distance, and she came out of it smiling and was basically, yeah, I'm fine. At the end of the day, she did admit that she might not be able to get through the whole series wicket keeping, but as we know, they've got Beth Mooney in reserve. It's not going to be a problem for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the compactness of the schedule, I guess we talked about this last week, but both sides were very much, yes, that is going to impact on the 11s and the teams that we're able to put out, and kind of selection going through the series. Although Heather Knight did kind of point out that it would be silly to make predictions now because tours like this one are just a bit unpredictable, and you've sort of got to take it very much on a game-by-game basis rather than saying, oh, we'll hold X player in reserve to play in Y match. Now, Sid, while I was writing up my bit for The Guardian, you were actually able to observe a bit more England's training session actually on the ground at the North Sydney Oval, and we both managed to watch a bit of Australia's training session earlier. And interestingly, you've noticed a little bit of a difference in approaches, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting seeing Australia. Australia, very, very focused, very professional. They had obviously decided in advance exactly what each group of players were going to be doing at each point of time. They sent some players over to the ground here. They had some players over in the main sort of stadium in the actual North Sydney Oval there. They had people that were boundary fielding on the actual spots on the boundary where they're going to be fielding and sending them up high balls to take. They had people doing slip fielding. Again, they moved them like 10 yards back from the pitch, but basically in the slip fielding positions where they will be in the actual match. So Australia, very serious, very professional, very organised. England, very much the opposite. One important thing is that England treated it very much as like sort of a general sort of warm-up. Let's go to the ground, let's do some warm-up, let's do a few drills. They had the music on England. Big deal though, England were actually enjoying it. Australia didn't look like they were enjoying their training session very much. They were taking it very seriously, weren't enjoying it. England were having fun, they were having a laugh, they had the music on, but they didn't have that focus. They did some high catches, but they didn't have the focus of going, this is the group that are doing the high catches, and they're doing this, and this then, while this group's going off there and doing that. Different approaches. Let's see which approach wins up winning matches. Yeah,
it'd be really interesting to see, won't it? I think that John Lewis is a little bit more like that in his coaching style compared to Shelley Nitschke. I think that he's much more laid back and chill, and is very much focused on the players having a good time, whereas Australia have traditionally, and obviously Nitschke's been involved in the setup for a number of years before she became the main head coach, have very much had this real hard-working attitude, and that, to be fair, that's brought them a lot of success. So as you say, we will wait and see. So a few hours to go now until that first match. How important is the first game, Sid, do you think, that first ODI?
Well, I mean, it's as important as it is. I mean, Alyssa Healy was very much, we really want to get our 2 points on the board. And Heather was, also saying, what we'd obviously like to get an early start. It's not a long series in many ways, so you want to get some momentum. Heather talked about momentum, didn't she? It is really important. On the other hand, if you lose this game, well, you've still got plenty of games to come back. So if you lose this, there's still another 14 points to play for in the rest of the series.
Absolutely, yeah. I do think it was interesting though that both captains seemed very, very keen on getting those first 2 points and winning that opening game. And as you say, particularly Heather Knight's statement about momentum seems like that was being echoed also by what Alyssa Healy said. If you go 2-0 down, because the matches are so close together, that's pretty critical. We'll be watching that first game with interest. We're sure you will be as well. And now we're going to go off and actually enjoy some sunshine because it's lovely. See you next week.